There are some moments in history that are just so powerful, it feels like they stop time itself. And today, we're going to look at one of those moments, a single, coordinated second that finally brought an end to the deafening, unimaginable noise of a world at war.
So yeah, that exact moment, it arrived on November 11th, 1918. After 4 long years of just relentless, deafening conflict, the entire world seemed to hold its breath and heard, well, nothing, just silence.
All right, so let's dive into this. Because really, to understand the sheer power of that silence, you first have to understand the sheer scale of the noise that came before it. I mean, what was the world actually like leading up to that one day? Well, for over 4 brutal years, World War I had just been raging. It was a global meat grinder. I mean, it stretched all the way from the muddy, rat-infested trenches of the Western Front to the scorching hot deserts of the Middle East. This was a conflict that literally consumed entire nations. Just try to wrap your head around this number for a second. 70 million soldiers. That's how many people were mobilized across the globe. It's an absolutely staggering figure. And honestly, it leads to an even more devastating one. 16 million. 16 million people dead. And look, this wasn't just soldiers. This number includes millions of civilians, people caught in the crossfire, victims of starvation, of disease. It's no wonder that by late 1918, the world was just utterly exhausted. Everyone was desperate for it to end. And for the Central Powers, well, the writing was on the wall. Germany, in particular, was getting battered on the battlefield and was practically collapsing from revolution back home. They knew they couldn't continue. So they finally went looking for an armistice, a ceasefire. Which begs the question, right? How on earth do you negotiate an end to a war while you're still fighting it? Well, the answer, it turns out, is you do it in secret. This timeline here, it really shows just how frantic those final days were. I mean, on November 7th, you've got this small German delegation making a super perilous journey across no man's land, holding up a white flag. A day later, they're basically locked away inside a private railway car deep in a French forest, sitting across from the unyielding Allied Supreme Commander. And then, just 3 incredibly tense days later, in the dark, before the sun even comes up, the deal is signed.
But let's be really clear here, this was not a negotiation between equals. No way. Allied Marshal Ferdinand Foch basically presented terms that were a complete surrender. Germany had to evacuate all its armies. Immediately. They had to hand over their entire war machine. We're talking submarines, machine guns, aircraft, the whole shebang. And they had to agree to a complete stop to all the fighting. And that stop, it had a very, very specific deadline. And this right here brings us to what is maybe the most tragic and just surreal part of this whole story. Because even though the war was officially over on paper, out on the battlefield, the killing hadn't stopped. Yeah, it's an absolutely brutal fact. For 6 long hours, even with peace guaranteed, commanders on both sides kept fighting. I mean, can you believe that? Some wanted to grab some last-minute glory, others were just following orders. And because of that, thousands of men died or were wounded in the final, completely pointless hours of a war that was already over. And then the clock struck 11. Just try to imagine it. 1 second, you've got the roar of artillery, the crack of rifles, the chaos. And the very next second, nothing. An abrupt, profound, almost unnatural quiet. After more than 1,500 days of nonstop noise, the war was finally, truly over. So what happens next, right? The guns are silent. Well, that silence on the battlefield was almost immediately replaced by this massive wave of human emotion that just rippled across the entire globe. And really, it set the stage for how we remember this day, even now. And that reaction, it was this complex explosion of feelings. I mean, of course, in cities like Paris and London, you had bells ringing and huge crowds just flooding the streets celebrating. But that joy, it was all tangled up with this overwhelming sense of relief. And, of course, a deep, profound mourning for everything and everyone that had been lost. This moment created such a powerful legacy. At first, November 11th was called Armistice Day. It was a celebration, right? The war to end all wars was finally done. But as time went on, the meaning started to shift, to evolve.
Today, we know it as Remembrance Day or Veterans Day. It's a much more solemn day to honor not just the end of that one war, but everyone who has ever served and fallen in conflict.
And maybe the most powerful, most enduring symbol of this remembrance is the simple red poppy. It's an amazing story, actually. After the fighting, these resilient little flowers were often the very first things to grow back on the torn-up, devastated battlefields. They became this incredible international symbol, a symbol of the blood that was shed, sure, but also of hope, of renewal, and of peace.
Which really leaves us with this one big thought, doesn't it? The generation that fought World War I, they truly, truly believed they were fighting the last war. The silence they finally achieved on November 11th was supposed to be permanent. So now, more than a century later, their story really challenges us. It makes us ask ourselves, how do we honor their sacrifice? Not just by remembering the war, but by actually continuing their work for a lasting peace.